Everybody, it's Claire here from Sewn by Claire, and today we're going to be making the winter dress that fits under the winter skating coat, and that's part of a complete outfit for Luna Lapin. Now the outfit is shown in this book, which is Luna Lapin, A Year of Making. This is the coat on the front section here, and then the dress, I tried to mark the pages with my tape measure, is inside just there. It's that one there, which is a wrapover design with that bias cut front, and then it has ties on the side as well. And this has been quite an interesting dress because it's caused a bit of a confusion and frustration, I think, for a few people. There is an erratum in the book as well, so there is a change to the pattern in the book, and we'll talk about that in a second. We'll also talk about the fabric, but first I want to say a really big thank you to Colleen Moulson-Hewes, who has sponsored the kit for me to make this outfit for you. So I want to say a really big thank you to Colleen on behalf of both myself for allowing me to bring this video to you, but on behalf of everybody who watches this video and gets some help from it and encouragement and doesn't throw it out the window. So you'll have had, well, you might not have, if you are aware of the Cool Crafting website, and I'll put a link up here for you, then you'll either be able to buy the Make Me kit, which will include the pattern, or you'll be able to buy a remake kit. If you've already got the book like I have, which is this one here, then you'll be able to just buy the remake kit because your pattern is already in your book. If you've not got the book, then you'll need to buy a Make Me kit because that will include the pattern. Okay, hopefully you're used to Luna Lapin by now and you've got that. But if you're jumping straight into this dress, I have been reading some posts on the website, and the Facebook group, and there is quite a lot of commentary to say that it isn't a beginner dress. So if you're making this dress, please try to allow some extra time for it so that you've got time to work through all of the steps. But I'm going to hold your hand every step of the way, and we'll finish with a beautiful dress that we're really happy to make and to put onto our Luna. Okay, so let's start with the pattern first. I'll turn the camera down and we'll get started. So this is future me just popping back to show you the finished dress, just so that you can have a look and see if it's something that you would like to make. It's got a beautiful full skirt, the lovely tie at the back of the neck, the line, the lovely grown on sleeves that's on part of the side panel, and then this lovely bias print cut front section here on the dress. So yeah, and it's a slight wrap over as well on there. So I'll be quiet now, I'll pop off for you because it's been a long day, and hopefully you'll enjoy stitching along with me and making a winter dress of your own for your Luna or for your character. Okay, see you in a bit. Okay, so I've just got my book here, and the instructions start on page 24 for Luna's winter dress, which is here. But you'll need to turn towards the back to pages 120 to 124, and that's going to include all of the pieces. We've got a front and front facing, we're going to cut 4 of those. We've got the winter dress front skirt, we're going to cut 2 of those. We've got the back skirt, which is cut on the fold, and we're going to cut 1 of those, and we need to join that pattern piece together so that it's the right size. And that's the piece with the erratum in. And what I've done is I have actually amended it on my book here, and I've actually crossed out the amount that Sarah Peel says in the group to cut out, to cross off, so that I remember for future reference as well, and you may choose to do the same. So the front, your front dress and your back dress should be the same length, and you reduce the back skirt in order to make that work for you. We've then got the back bodice, which is cut 2, the side bodice cut 2, and then the ties, which is cut 2 as well. So what we're going to do first is we're going to trace our pattern off, and the way that I do this is I have tracing paper. I'll just lay it over the top and I'll trace around the drawn line, so that's the solid line on the outside, but make sure that you include any notches, which are these little lines on the side there. Make sure you include your grain line, because this piece here is cut on the diagonal, which is called the bias. So we need that line there to make sure that we get that that crisscross tartan shape design on the front. Everything else is cut on the straight, I think, so that's fine. The side bodice is cut on the bias as well, and then we've got the tie as well there. So if you want to find your pages in your book and get your pattern traced off, If you're not sure how to trace patterns off, then there is a video on my website, well, I haven't got a website, on my YouTube channel, which will tell you how to do that, so that it goes into more detail. Whether you want to use a window or a light box, you can do that, or print off the pattern from the publisher's website and use that one instead. So I'm going to just quickly jump onto tracing out my pattern pieces, and then we'll get started talking about the fabric. Okay, so I've got my pattern pieces cut out, and what you might notice is with mine, if we do a bit of a pattern check to make sure we've got everything. So we've got the back skirt with the cut on fold mark. We've got the front skirt, which we'll cut 2 separately. We've got the ties that we'll cut 2 of separately. Can make those slightly longer, but we'll have a look when we lay it out in our fabric. We've got the winter dress back bodice, which we can cut 2. We've got the side bodice, which we cut 2. And then we have the front and the front facing, which is a cut 4. Now, my recommendation is that whenever you've got to cut 4, cut out 2 of the pattern pieces, because then when you lay this on your fabric, you've not got to guess if you've got enough room, and it's much easier to then not forget to take these out. And I've just put 1 of 2 on here, so cut 2 but 1 of 2, and cut 2 of 2, and then I remember that I need to pop those on together. Now, the other thing is that I also went onto the website, not the website, the Facebook group, to have a look at discussions regarding the winter dress, and what I decided to do was to toile it. Now, a toile is a French word, and all it means is make a practice garment and just see how it looks, and I wanted to see how it worked. So excuse how rough this dress is. It's just out of scrap fabric. It's an old shirt of my husband's, and I've used red thread because that's what I will be using when I make the final garment up. And I'm just noticing a couple of things. So the back of the dress feels quite loose to me as well, but that's fair enough. The sleeves are grown-on sleeves, so there isn't a separate pattern piece for the sleeves. It's all incorporated in the side panel. The ties aren't very long, so you could extend those if you wanted those to be a bit fuller. Or you could omit the ties and use a length of red ribbon. You could always do that, and that would make a really nice, impactful bow as well. And then put it all together, and it went together pretty well, remembering that difference on the skirt. So the back skirt has been cut out with that shorter length, that alteration for the erratum that we made in the dress. The other thing to note, if I take these pins out of here, is that the dress isn't lined at all. So the centre back bodice has got lining on it. Sorry, Luna, just pulling you around a bit. But in this dress, we've got the exposed waistline there, and we've got the exposed edges over the shoulders here. I do think that there is a way to make this lined in order to make it nicer. But because so many people have struggled with the written instructions to make the basic dress, we're going to follow that for this tutorial, because otherwise it's going to make it possibly into 3 parts, and I want to try and keep it as tight as I can to 2 parts, and hopefully let's get it made in a couple of hours together if we can do. So I will be neatening the edges inside here in order to give it the finish that Sarah Peel has designed. Okay, so I'm going to, now that I'm happy with the toile and that it's finished, you know, turned out okay, you know, as I say, this has just been really roughly sewn up. Then we're going to get our fabric out and we'll start and make our dress. So I've just gone into my kit and I've got out the red tartan fabric. You'll notice that when you look at this, one side the tartan is kind of very smooth and looks quite crisp on the colours. On the reverse side, it's slightly brushed cotton, like you might see on a man's shirt, or on a, you know, brushed cotton pyjama bottoms. I'm going to sew it with the more vibrant side on the outside as being mine, and then I'm going to keep this other side, the fluffier side, for the inside. But just know, whichever you choose is quite correct, as in you can use either, but just choose one and then stick to it, because if you mix and match one side that's sort of a little bit more vibrant and the other side that's fluffier, you will notice that on your finished garment, so you'll just need to bear that in mind. Now I've already made my winter coat, so you'll see I've got a section cut out, which was the back of the shawl collar for that, so hopefully we're going to avoid that. But I'm just going to take this over to the ironing board and iron all the creases out of this. The other thing that I've got is I've got my haberdashery pack as well, and I've got in there the 3 press studs, and then there's 6 black buttons in there that came with the kit from Cool Crafting. So I've just got those out and just to one side, and we'll talk about those later. So I'm just going to tuck those under there for now. Let me get the fabric ironed and we'll get started. If you want to do the same, please. So I've just finished ironing my fabric. The one thing I'm going to ask you to notice that when I was lining it up, I was thinking that all of the checks were similar to this, but there's an alternating pattern between the checks. So if I hold this up for you, so I've got a white line going through the middle of this check, look, but then nothing on this one, and then a white line going through there. So if we want everything to be lined up properly, just look at your top of your fabric along the edge here and make sure that you've got your corresponding lines, and where there's a white line down the middle of a square, you've got that matched up as well, because that will help you just make sure that for the tartan and for the matching, we get everything lined up as well as possible. You can, this fabric is holding on to itself quite nicely. It's not slipping and sliding around. That furriness on the inside, because I've got my right sides out, is just holding on to the fabric. But I am just going along and just making sure that on this edge here, that I've got all of that all lined up so that that's all right. So if I fold that back, you can see how the fabric is lined up and goes across on the edge. So I've got it all pressed out straight now, so let's put my ironing mat out of the way. I've got a piece cut out, and what I've done is the side where it's sort of got a slight underlap, then I'm just exposing that bit. Can you see how it's not quite, when I've folded it now for doing the dress, it's not quite on top of each other. So that's just so that I remember and know. And if you've watched any of my videos before, let's put the twirl out of the way, then I start off by placing anything that's got to go on the fold. So let's pop this piece here down first. And because the bottom of the fabric is right on the edge, then I'm going to go right up to the edge of my fabric. And we're going to pin that in place, and I'm going to follow pretty much, I think, shall I follow that? The finish of the cutting layout in the book is what I'm trying to say. Sometimes my brain works faster than my mouth will do, would you believe? And we all know that I know how my mouth works. Right, okay, so let's just get that pinned on first. So then let's pin the side skirt onto the back of here as well, because we can put those right up against each other because they're going to be the same length. And what we want by doing that as well, we make sure that this pattern is going to continue at the same point around the skirt too. So I would recommend that if possible, you do the same thing, so that and then when we cut this out, we just have to cut one line between these 2 pattern pieces, and everything will be lined up beautifully, which is what we want. So let's put those onto there. Okay, let me have a look at this cutting guide and just have that in mind for what Sarah's doing, just so that we know. Okay, so she has put this at the top here. So she's put the tie at the top. And I think we've got room to make the tie longer if you wanted to as well, because that sort of is a little, if you looked on the back of the dress, then you could make this tie belt longer if you wanted to. And the way that I do that, I'm going to leave that right on top of there, because again it's straight lines, so that will then just be one cut all the way through. And then what I do is, when I want to extend a pattern piece we can go ahead and just add an extra piece of paper onto the end, but what I do is I extend my pins over the edge of my fabric, and that is the reminder that I want to make that longer. And we'll just try the rest of the pattern pieces first to see if we can actually get this to work. So it's interesting that we could fit that in there if we had. But let's carry on and see. Let's follow Sarah's advice, shall we? Okay, so the next piece then is the winter dress. Is the back of the bodice goes down here. Let's have that going into here. And I think that what I'll do is I'm sort of laying it all out pretty much as Sarah's done in the book, but what I will do then is if I think there's anywhere where we can save any fabric, then you know me, I like to try and save as much as I can. These two pieces on the diagonal have to go onto the diagonal. So we have to have those two on the diagonal. And the way that we do that is we've got these grain lines that are on here. And what we want to be able to do is put that so that it follows a stripe or a line up. And if we can do that, it should be following through because we've got our pattern matched up on the other. Then you should have the same pattern on the other. And the lines on the tartan will help you make sure that you've got this as straight as possible. So yeah, because you see in the pattern I've got the little bit for the shawl collar that I cut out over this section up here, so I don't actually need that bit to be included on mine. So normally you'll have seen me measuring with a tape measure, and I measure from the folded edge, which is just off screen for me, but from the folded edge put your tape measure right against there and go to the top of the grain line, and then measure again and go to the bottom, and the two measurements should be exactly the same. So if you haven't got a stripe, then that's what I would do, but if you've got a stripe, personally I would follow the stripe now, because I've got a white line going through there which I can just follow, and I'm going to do that to fit mine on. But hopefully this is where you'll be able to see that having the piece of pattern piece cut out twice will help you to just be able to fit all of this on, and then to be able to cut it out with confidence and saving any fabric that you can. Okay, so I've got this pinned down pretty much now. So the back of the dress is on the fold, just here. Then the front of the skirt is there. I've got the two ties, and I'm just going to extend my pins along, and this is how I extend my pattern pieces if I wanted to do it without altering the actual physical paper pattern. So I'm just going to take that up to that next bodice part, and then I'll sew down so that I'll remember then to cut out around that. So I'm only extending it by 1.5 inches, a couple of inches, but you know, sometimes it makes a difference, and that little piece of fabric might otherwise just be thrown away, so it might as well be in the finished dress. So the tie is going to be extended slightly. I've then changed this round, so I've then put the side front into this section just here, and then I've got my two front panels, so my front and my front facing, both of them have got the grain line following one of these lines in white lines in the middle of a check. So I've made sure that's the same on both of them, although you could argue it's not strictly necessary. But then on the back of the bodice, because we have got plenty of fabric here, I have then chosen that down the centre back of my dress, that white stripe flows too. So it'll just mean that if I'd have lined it up with one of the edges of these checks here, it would have looked off, because one side would have had half of this bright, more densely coloured check with the green in, and half wouldn't. So again, it's just paying attention to your pattern and just on your fabric, and just seeing in the threads where they are and seeing how you want to cut it out. So just so that you know, there's a bit of extra fabric at the top up here, there's a bit over here, but in all we can save some of this. So I'm just going to cut this out now, pretty much just as you would cut out ordinarily anyway, and then let's come back to each other when we're going to be doing those tailor's tacks. We'll do our tailor's tacks together and our notches, and then we'll get started. Okay, so I've got everything all cut out. There's no notches on the tie belt at all, so let's just pop that to one side. Let's start with the skirt pieces. So on the back of the fold at the top, we want to just make sure you've got your skirt the way that you put it on, the fabric, and then we're going to put a snip in the centre back there, just on that fold line, just to mark that, because that'll help us later. The skirt fronts don't need anything to them, but we are going to remember to keep which side is up and which side is down. So if I just take a pin and I then just put it through each side of the fabric, you see how well this fabric holds on to each other. oops, separate those two bits. Just the fibres holding on. So I'm just putting a pin through twice on the top edge of both of those skirt pieces, because that will remind me that that's the top of the skirt if I forget. I've got the notch on my back skirt, so I'll remember, but for the front skirts we haven't got that. And then we need to do a notch at the centre back of the bodice, just a little couple of millimetres, and by a notch we're just using the blade of our scissors and we're just going in just a couple of millimetres, just enough to show us that there's a snip there that is deliberate, and that will mark that for us. On the side bodices, or let's just do those in a minute because they're the ones with the tailor's tacks. So then this piece here is the side bodice, and I think this is the piece that will have been giving people most of the trouble. You've got, it's actually a symmetrical pattern, so if you fold it along its length, you'll see that there's a notch at the top here, and that is actually for the top of the shoulder. So that's going to tie in with our shoulder seams later. And then on the opposite side, there's two notches, and this is where we're going to need to. Now these two notches can be 1/4 of an inch deep, so that's deeper than a normal notch, but they can be 1/4 of an inch deep, so I've made mine slightly deeper. Okay, so you've just got the one on the centre of the shoulder, and these are really important notches, so don't skip that part. And then on the bodices, the fronts and the front facings, we've got a notch down the front here, which we can just mark with our little snip. And then we've got a notch here just off this curved edge, just round about where the press studs are going to go, and that's for our waist tie, so we want that one to be marked. And then we'll do that on the other side as well, so on the other piece, so that we've got those two marked. Okay, that's all the notches that I've noticed. Hopefully you're screaming at the or shouting at the screen if I've forgotten any, but hopefully we've got all of those. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to mark the tailor's tacks. Now you'll notice that some of them have got letters in, and that's corresponding with the 4 press studs that you'll be putting on later. So just be aware of the 4 that you've got, and we can refer back to the pattern to see which ones they are. But I'll probably mark all 6 so that we've got them in the right place. So let me just show you how to do that. So I've chosen a thread that I think will show up quite nicely on my fabric. I usually try and choose a colour that I've not got any of in my fabric, and this is a pink, and I've not got any pink inside my tartan. And then what I've done is I've threaded a needle, and I've got it double, but I've not put a knot at the end. And then we're going to take a stitch north to south, or south to north, whichever you want to say it, across the circle, and we're going to leave a tail of a couple of inches, just like that. And then I go east to west across that same circle, and then we're going to leave a loop, and the loop is going to be about the same length as our tail was that we left, and then we snip that off, leaving another tail. So we've got this tuft of threads, and then what I do is I then just go through the loop and just cut that so that you've got this loop and this tuft of threads. You can fold the fabric back and put a pin through the centre of your circle, and then use a friction pen or something else to mark, or chalk to mark the centre of the notch. You can do that, the centre of the dot circle. You can do that too, but for me, I just like the way that tailor's tacks comes together. I think it's a nice little bit of slow stitching that is very useful. And so what we do is we carry on doing the next one, because I'll show you how to do these. I mean, I would go on and do all 6 normally, and I will do them on both sides because it depends which one we use for which front and the inside as to which we're going to need on to be marked. So you might as well go ahead and mark them. They don't take long to do. And then you cut through the threads again. So we've got 2 marked then. So then what I will do is take out my pins. I then peel back the paper pattern, and then hold on to my thread so that the threads stay in the fabric. Just fold that back for the moment so you can see the threads there, and you can see on the back we've got this lovely cross on the back there to mark those 2 places. And then what we do is we peel back apart these 2 pieces of fabric now, and we make a bridge of threads. When we've got a bridge of threads, and that's why you need a nice long tuft on the other side, we can then snip through those threads, and that then separates them from each side. So let's do the other one as well. And normally I'd do all 6 of these tailor's tacks, then peel back at the same time, but I just want to show you straight away. So you've got tufts on the front, and then, oh, if I can get this apart, we've got the crosses on the other side, but you can clearly see where those markings are, and they're identical on both sides. And if you're careful, these bits of tufts of thread don't generally pull out, especially if you remember that you've anything with pink thread you want to leave in for the time being. So go ahead now and mark your tailor's tacks on both pattern pieces, and then we'll meet you back here. Okay, so I've got all of my pieces all ready now, all tailored tacked, ready to go. The first thing that Sarah suggests that we do is take our tie, so let's just pop that pattern piece to one side. And what Sarah has suggested that you do is one piece of your tie, and then to fold it right sides together, and then to sew it along one of the long sides, and then turn it through. And you can do that if you've got the turning tools. My concern is that this fabric really holds on to each other, it holds on to itself. And so I think that pulling it through is either going to distort the fabric, or because it frays very easily, is going to fray the fabric. So we're going to do it a different way. If you want to just put the long sides together and sew down it and then turn it round, please do so and jump on to the next stage. But if you've not got the turning tools, or if you want to learn about this other way, then just stick around, because what we're going to do is we're going to take hold of our ironing mat, and we're going to take hold of our iron, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to fold each of these fabric pieces exactly in half. And I've got the right sides on the outside. If you want to use a press cloth, you can do, but this is 100% cotton, and therefore it shouldn't have any problems with marking your fabric as long as your iron isn't horrendously hot. So let's do it diagonally because we'll have more room on the ironing board. I'm going to show you just with one, and then you're going to do the same with both of these. So fold it exactly in half so your cut edges are on top of each other, and then just give it a press, just to put that crease down the centre of it. Then what we're going to do is open it out when it's hot enough, when it's cool enough to handle, not hot enough to handle, cool enough to handle. And of course, if you're using the ribbon suggestion, then you wouldn't need to do this. You'll just need to neaten the ends of your ribbon. So we've got this folded edge down the centre. What I want you to do then is fold each of the raw edges into the middle and press it down. Try and keep it as neat as you can do and as even as you can do. Just into the centre, and then we're going to turn that round, and then we're going to fold the other side into the centre as well. Try and get your plaids to match across the divide. It's going to make it more difficult for you to see the difference, but if you can, just keep them nice and even, because that will affect the finish as well on your ties. And then when you've done that, I want you now to fold both sides over on top of each other and press again. You are going to have external stitching this way of doing it, but because these ties are so narrow, I think I do genuinely believe this is the best way of doing it. Okay. The next thing I want you to do is just to choose one end, and then we're going to fold in the end, and then we're just going to press it on the end just to hold it for us, so we've got a bit of a crease. Okay, so we've done the it in half this way, and then we've folded it in half that way as well. Okay, not in half, just folded it over. Then what I'm going to do is I take my snips and I'm going to do a little V shape in the centre of this fabric and remove some of that fabric. So can you see, I need to change my lights around, don't I? I think I've got too much light down so you can't see. So that's going to into the centre because, and I've not gone all the way up to that folded line, just stay a few millimetres away from it, because what that enables us to do is to push in those two side edges slightly so it keeps it away from the raw edge. So keep your folded over edge as it was, and then just push in. I don't know if you can see, let me just see if I've got a piece of paper here. Look, if I put that underneath, what I'm doing is I'm pushing in those side pieces like that so they can meet in the middle, but you still want to keep that folded edge right. It just helps just to take out some of that bulk. because then when you lie this on top, you've got that extra bit in. When you fold it in half, you've then got room to, there's my awl, to just tuck those raw edges in, and then you won't get any raw edges on the end of your tie, because we've got to sew these down next, and so it will just help you do that. So I then take a pin and just pop it through the end there just to hold that together, and then you want just some pins, and I'm going to match up my plaids going down my lines, going down, so that they're on top of each other as best as I can. They might move slightly while we're stitching, but as best as we can. Let's try and, we've got this lovely plaid to work with, so why don't we try and keep it looking lovely. There we go. So that's going all the way down there. So this one then is ready to sew. So what I need you to do is just go back and just to do the other tie as well, so that we've got that ready to stitch, and then we'll be taking it over to the ironing board, not the ironing board, the sewing machine. Can you tell? Oh gosh, getting all my words wrong today. I do apologise. We're going to take this across to the sewing machine, and then we're going to be sewing across the end here, and then all the way down that straight edge, and we're going to be sewing quite close to the edge here, which is why we want those raw edges to stay inside. So go ahead and just press your other tie the same way, and then we'll get into our sewing machine and we'll get on with sewing these. So I have the red thread in my machine already, and we're going to start and stitch with our ties first. Now, the problem is that you've got a lot of bulk at the end here before you go down, and you've not got much for your feed dogs, which is the ridged area underneath your needle, to grab hold of. So I'm going to suggest that if you've got a machine that cuts the threads, just give yourself a few threads, just a couple of threads, just to be able to pull on. And also, if you've got an awl, which is a pointy tool, one of these, then that's a really good thing to have as well, because that does help you be able to manipulate the fabric through where you can't get your fingers. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to set up my machine so we can sew quite closely down the edge of this, and using the majority of the feed dog on one side. So I'm actually going to move my needle. So hopefully you've got an ability to move your needle as well. And I'm just going to see where this is going to fit at the moment, to make sure that the edge of the presser foot is going to give me a good finish, and it is there. Right, okay. So moving your needle, as if you've watched any of my other videos, you'll know is one of the favourite things to do, just to be able to get us a really nice line. So I'm going to use the edge of the presser foot, and I've made sure that when the folded edge of the tie runs along the edge of the presser foot, my needle will still be in my fabric to be able to close that down, but it needs to be close to the edge. So we want to be stitching to this side here of that white line. If you stitch down the middle, you're going to leave this open and it's going to look strange. You need to be like 1/8 of an inch or 1/16 of an inch in from your open edge that you've pressed to hold both of those together, which is why when you're pinning, you need to make sure that those edges are on top of each other. We're going to start with the little short edge first, and as I say, this is where it could mean that the threads don't want to go through into the fabric, but I'll show you a way of neatening that off so you don't have to keep going backwards and forwards. So let's start at the very end here. Make sure that your needle's going to go into your fabric, and then I'm going to take just a couple of stitches forward. Okay, and that started going, and now I'm going to use my needle up down button and leave my needle in my work if you've got one of those. If not, just use your hand crank or your hand wheel to be able to do that. And then I'm going to turn, and now I'm going to take my pin out because we're going to be straight onto that, and I'm going to put my presser foot down, and we're right on the edge. So we have to just be, I'm going to take this really carefully and really steady, just one stitch at a time, and luckily my fabric is starting to go through. If not, just put a little bit of tension on your thread you've left at the end, and that will help you pull the fabric through the machine straight until you're off that edge of that bulky area, and then you'll be able to go through. Likewise, you can always use your awl as well just to help the fabric through. So once you're through, we're going to go down this side of this fabric nice and steadily, really close to the edge. We're going to stop before our pins. I don't sew over pins, and I'd recommend that you don't either. It can mess up your machine, the timing on your machine, and also it can either bend or dull your needle if you keep hitting pins. Just keep all of this over on top of each other so it's all nice and neat. And if you've got a speed control, go slow, it's not a time for zooming. Stop to take your pins out. And then having this where your needle always ends up in your work, if not, just hand crank it before you start to take anything out. It'll stop any jigs in your stitches, being as this is a top stitching. Down to the last pin. Let's make sure these edges are over on top of each other. And let's go off the edge. And I haven't reversed, but that isn't concerning me at the moment because the end's going to be tied in. So then when you've got to the end here, you remember that we didn't reverse. We've got a nice little edge there, so that's going to look nice and neat. It's not going to unravel on us. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a needle, separate these, pull on one of the threads so you have both threads to the same side, and it should give you a little loop that you can pull up. Okay, it's not going to do it for me. It might do it for you, but it isn't for me today. So what I'm going to do is just going to thread this first. What we want is we want both pieces of thread to be on the same side of our tie. It's going to give you a nice little invisible finish without a bulky end. So I've got both of my threads now on the same side, and I'm going to make 2 little hand tie knots in them. 1, 2. And then I then cut off the threads so that they're the same length and thread them back through my needle. If you're careful, you'll be able to get both through at the same time. And then where the knot is on the edge of your fabric, I want you to push your needle in so it's going inside the fabric and down the tube, if you like, just for about 1.5 inches, couple of inches, so you can't see it on either side. And then just pull through. Don't lose your needle inside there, and then pull through so you've got the raw edges coming through, which it doesn't want to do. That's it. We've just got stuck slightly. Just flatten it out, and then if you put a little bit of tension on your threads, you'll then be able to pull your threads off, and that'll give you a lovely neat edge that won't come undone on the end of there for you. So there's one done, so go ahead and do your other one exactly the same way, and then we'll move on. So the next thing that we're going to take then is going to take one set of our front panel, and we are going to take out the pin for that and put our pattern piece to one side. We're then going to find our back piece and take the pin out of that and put that to one side as well. So we've got 2 of those, and we're going to make up 2 pairs of these fronts. So let's put the right side up in the centre of our table, and then we're going to take the shoulder edge, which is at the top here of each of these, and we're going to fold it over so that right sides are together, and so that the scoop of the neck is coming across to the side seam on the other side. And then we're going to put 2 pins in to hold this straight, because in my experience, if you only just put 1 pin in, then it tends to twist on any shoulder seam like this where it's a little bit tiny. Just make sure you've got your raw edges together. And if you want to stitch that one first, you can do, but what we're going to do next is with the corresponding partner of that one, we're going to put that one right side down as well with the back, and then we're going to match that so that that goes into the corner as well here, and we're going to just match up the top of those shoulder seams. So we've got that pinned on, so that when we open this out, let's just do a quick sanity check, because when we open this out, this is our centre back here with that white stripe going down the back, and we want the neckline to be open and to go round to the front there, which will be mark the centre front. Okay, so that's how yours wants to look too. So let's stitch this one first. Just put my needle position back to where it needs to be after sewing the ties. And a couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back, and then needle in the work, and then I can take out my pin. We're going to stitch across at 1/4 inch seam allowance, take the second pin out, and reverse at the other shoulder. So let's take that one out and take our starting and ending threads off. So that's our seam just sewn there. Then let's go on to our other one. And let's do exactly the same again with the same 1/4 inch seam allowance. Just make sure your fabric's lying flat underneath because it's easy for it to get folded up. Take the second pin out and just reverse at this edge. And this fabric does tend to fray really easily, so just handle it really gently because it really does want to fray. And shed everywhere. So there's our first one all done, and we're going to press these seams here open so that they can just finger press those sometimes. And just hold those open, so that's the 1/4 inch. So let's put that to one side because now let's go ahead and do exactly the same with the other one. Make sure you've got your right side up facing. Take your other two front pieces and we're going to fold these so that they're facing down, and so that centre diagonal line is going towards the centre front of this one as well. Just pin these and sew these again with the same seam allowance that you've been doing with your other one. When you've finished, you'll end up with two identically the same, which is fine. So what we're going to do is take one of them, oops, I took two, take one of them and just open it out so you've got your right side up and I've got the back facing towards me. So that's just my back is up there. We're going to take the second one and we're going to have this now so that the back and the right side of the fabric is going to lie down straight on top of that back piece just there. And just fold those long front facings out so that they all match. First thing we're going to do is go to our shoulder seams, and on the inside of the neck edge, we're not doing the long outside here that's all straight, we're going to do the shaped and inner curve bit of the neckline here. Just open out your seam allowances on your neckline, put those seams right on top of each other, and then I want you to put a pin just to hold it together. So this is your first match point. And then do the same on the other side as well. They should sit beautifully together. If you've used the same seam allowance on your shoulder seams, then they will sit directly on top of each other and be really nice. Let's put a pin in there. Okay. Now I want you to just work with one front side at a time, and let's just match up the bottom of the front so the hems match, and let's put a pin in there to hold that together. And then let's go all the way up to the point at the top of the neck, and let's put a pin in there for another match point just there. And then just ease your fibre. Now just remember, don't go pulling this around because this is on a bias, which means there's a little bit of stretch to the fabric, just a natural stretch within the weave of the fabric. So just handle it really carefully, keep it nice and flat on your work surface, on your cutting board or whatever, or your table, whatever you're using, and then just put your pins in to hold that flat. So just remember you're working off your neck edge again, and then let's go to the other side and do the same. So let's match up the hem first and put those on top of each other. And just being careful not to pull this fabric at all because it is very easy to get one longer than the other. But just remember that we cut these out of the same pattern piece, so they will be the same length. If yours aren't the same length, you've just got to coax the fibres back under control in order that everything will lie flat. And then come again to the top of your neck edge there, centre front edge, and then pull that, put a pin in there. Make sure everything's lying all nice and flat together, and then you can put a couple of pins down that edge as well. So let's just go to the back neck now, and at the back of the neck we had that notch, so let's just match those to that back neck edge together, notch together, and then put a pin in there. And if you remember, it should be pretty much where that white line going down the centre back was. On mine anyway, might not be the same on yours. Okay, so once we've got that all together, what we're going to do now is take it to the sewing machine. And if you just get your orientation right, so have your back towards you, and because we've got the right sides together, then the wrong side is up. We're going to start at the side along the bottom here first, and you might want to put a pin in just to hold this together. Put a pin in just to hold that on that edge there, and another one on the edge here. I nearly forgot that bit, didn't I? But you do need to remember to do this. And we're going to start stitching, and we're going to start at this edge just here, which is off the long straight one from the centre back, and we're going to start here, reverse stitch, come into the edge here, we're going to pivot down this front edge here, and then we're going to do some pivoting around the neckline, and we probably need some more pins in around here as well. Just put a couple more pins in just to hold this together. If you're not comfortable working with this many pins, just take a couple of minutes just to tack this edge together to give yourself that confidence that you've got everything all held in place properly. Or if you're working with a very slippy fabric, sometimes that can be a good idea too. So we're going to start down the bottom here, reverse into the centre there, pivot all the way down to here. We're going to pivot again, go round the neckline, round the back of the neck to here, pivot again, all the way down to the bottom, and then we're going to come out to the side edge here. Okay, all sounds so easy, doesn't it? So let's get our machine ready. We're going to sew it with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So let's pop that in, and let's take a couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back. And then let's put our needle in our work, because that's our anchor point, isn't it? Take this first pin out and let's sew across. That one's going to be in the way too. Okay, let's just check that. So one more stitch. Okay, so I'm to the 1/4 inch now, and let's go back down all the way down this front. Don't pull on your fabric here, you want it to be nice and flat. Stop for your pins. Just make sure there's no drag on your fabric and that it's not going to pull it out of shape. You get up towards this neck edge now. We're going to just go up until we can put our needle in our work. One more stitch, and then when we turn it, we're on that 1/4 inch mark. And now we're going to then, so we left our needle in our work, lifted up our presser foot, and then turned our fabric so we could come round. Okay, so let's carry on now. Coming up to a pin, let's take that one out. And if you find you're starting to go off kilter, remember, leave your needle in the work, lift up your presser foot, and just twist. Even just the slightest twist will just help you keep that edge nice and flat. Try not to sort of pull your fabric round if you can help it, because you will run the risk of making that warp if you're not careful. So let's come to the top of the shoulder. Wait till the last minute, take your pin out. There's that, that might help. And now we're going to start and pivot to come round the back of the neck. So just a few stitches at a time, then we can start and pivot. So make sure the backs are on top of each other just to keep that nice and straight. So we're now going across the centre of the back. Just keep starting to do the curving round to the other side of the back of the neck. Just removing your pins as you go. sure your raw edges are together. Lay down at the bottom here. I'm going to pivot again. I'm going across the bottom here. Remember to reverse at the end. Get out of the work. Let's take our threads off. And take the threads off at the start. We neaten our threads as we go, then we don't have such a big job at the end. Okay, so now we've joined the front, well, the facings and the back in those two identical sections together. What we need to do now is we just need to do some housekeeping just to keep this all nice and neat. So where you've got a right angle corner, I want you to go across and take off some of the fibres. Now be careful because these fibres are quite loose. So there's my stitching line and there's where I've cut just a couple of millimetres in from the edge. Anywhere you've got a right angle, I want you to do that. Don't do on the side here at the moment, we don't need to do that, but just on the, so that front corner. This one here as well, because that there is going to be a little bit thick. And what you're doing is you're just reducing the bulk in those edges so that then when we come to turn this, because we're going to turn this in a minute, then it's all going to sit nicely. Okay. The other thing that you can do is trim off a little bit of the wings of the seam allowance at the top of the seam allowance if you want to as well. There's not much there, but you know, it can help sometimes. Okay. Then, because this is a curved edge around the back of the neck and down the front, we're going to put some little snips in order that it'll sit nicely when we iron it. So just along this front edge, we're going to snip up to, but not through, the stitch line on the neck edge, just 3 or 4 times. That'll be enough on each side. So let's do the other side. And this will just help it sit out nicely when we turn it. And then because this is a bit of a tighter curve, going around the shoulders, we need to do the same, but we need to do those snips a little bit closer together. So you're going to have a few more snips in there just to ease that. If you go through your stitches by mistake, just go back to your sewing machine and just go a little bit into your garment and just rejoin, stitch over the line. But because you've snipped through it, you'll have to just go slightly and take a slightly bigger seam allowance in order to do that. But then if I fold that out, can you see how those little snips will help that stretch and fold out? Then, being careful, again, try not to push and shove your fabric. Let's just turn this round. So put my finger inside, hold on to it with my thumb, and then I can just push it through. We're just going to treat this front bias bit really, really carefully because it will stretch on you. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to take a pin, or you can take a rounded edge blunt instrument, and we're just going to pull out the corners to make sure that they're sitting all nicely. And then we're going to press this flat so that everything's lying exactly on top of each other. So just be careful with those corners because you will pull out loose threads if you're not careful, and you don't want a fuzzy corner. Okay, so that's there. Don't worry about the back of the neck at the moment, we'll sort that out. It's all wanting to kind of twist and tangle at the moment, but just concentrate on your corners for now, and I'll help you get your bearings with it and how we get it all to sit nice in a few moments when we go to iron this. Because sometimes ironing the fabric can tame it to how we want it to be. So just really gentle on those corners. Okay, so you notice at the moment I've not turned the back out, and I'd suggest that you leave that as it is, just for the moment. Let's just get these front bits how we want them to be. So first of all, I'm going to open this out on my ironing board, and I'm just going to press this from the inside just to get a nice edge on that centre front and get that all pushed over to one side. And then we can fold that over on the seam line and use our fingers just to coax that seam edge so that it's right on the edge. So we want that stitched edge to be really pushed out and lying all nice and flat. And then we can give that a bit of a press just on that centre front edge. Now let's have a look down the bottom here and get this edge all nice and ironed and all nice and flat and straight. Just make sure it's all coming out nicely. You can use a press cloth if you want to again, just to make this nice. So now I've got that bit done, let's go on to the other side first. And let's open this out and let's press this flat so that we've got that all nice how we want it to be. And then we can press that over again. And I think working with these long sides first will just give you a better orientation of where everything is and how it should all be sitting. Give it a bit of a press. Let's go down to the bottom down here and just make sure that that's all out and nice and flat, and give that a press. Right, so now with this back piece, let's separate out the two back pieces and turn them round so that we've got them so that the wrong sides are together. And let's just line those up first. So put those on top of each other, make sure the raw edges are together, and just give that a press. And just go up into the top of your neck. That'll just help get that ready just to start and find your orientation for your neckline. And you can then just poke the nose of your iron in along that neckline, and that will probably give you a bit of a starting hand just to lay that flat, and it has. Remember, your seam allowances for your shoulders should be directly on top of each other. Let's just turn this round so I can reach the other side without bumping the camera. Just push that along on that neck edge, and it'll just help get that straight. And then we can again just give this a press just to make sure that's all sitting right. So what happens is that you end up with the back of your garment, your dress here, and then you've got your two long side, your two fronts, one's your front and one's your front facing. What I would do now is just have a quick look and see if you prefer one side to the other for the crossover down the front, because you might well, because this is going to be the bias trim, not bias trim, but that crisscross on the front. So if I just show you the picture, can you see how that crosses over on the front there? That diagonal line, that's what we're looking to try and fix now. So just see, you might not have one that you prefer more than the other, and that's fine if you don't. I think I prefer this side. So I am just going to put a pin in the centre front of mine so that I know which way I want mine to be. Okay, so that's going to be a front, and this one here is going to be a front. The inside then is going to be my facing. So now I know which is the top side and which is my preferred side for using for that edge for the front of the dress. Right, so let's get, now the next thing to do is either to tack or to stay stitch down the edge of this neckline just to keep it all together. So stitch length up to a 4, can even go to a 5 if you wanted to, maybe go to a 5. And then I'm just going to stitch just under the seam allowance, because then we don't need to take the stitches out if we don't need to. So I'm just going to just do a quick row stitching along the edge here. Just be careful that you doesn't pull your fabric too much. You don't want to stretch this fabric at all. You want it to be nice and flat for us. You can put pins in it, but this brush cotton is seriously holding on to itself very nicely, so I'm not going to worry about that. That's one side just done. Oops, got pins on my scissors. I'll just cut off my threads anyway, starting and ending, and then we're just going to put the back in this side and go down the other side. Once you've done that, let's pop that to one side for the moment because we've finished with that section, and we're going to now work on the skirt. So let's just go and find our 3 skirt pieces. We've got our 2 centre fronts of our skirt pieces, and if you remember, take the pin off there, I've got a pin at the top to remind me which is our top. So let's just pop those down that way so that they match, and they will, if you can see, the stripes are all matching on the tartan going in towards each other, and that's what we want. And then let's take the pin out of the pattern piece for our top, for our other skirt. Let me just pop those pattern pieces away. And then we've got the snip in the top centre of the skirt as well. And when you put this piece of fabric down the centre front, let me just put that pin in the top there just to remind me which is the top, because I like to do that. Then when we lay our top pieces onto the skirt, you'll see that the plaid should match all the way around. And we want that to happen, so it's almost invisible for you to be able to see, isn't it? But there's my two front pieces. But you want these main lines to be following all the way across, and that's why we cut them out with them both side by side together and made sure that our edges matched. So we're going to take these each in place, and you'll know I've got the top edge marked, so we know which bit we're working with. And for this, I'm going to change the thread colour in my machines to my gathering thread so that we can see where we're actually putting the gathering lines, and then we know when we remove those gathering threads which ones we're taking out. If you're a more experienced sewer, then you don't need to do this, but if you're a beginner, it's a really good tip to get used to doing. Just doesn't take long to rethread your machine, and it will just give you that clarity when you come to do your gathering. So let me just change my colour. I've changed my thread colour for a really nice bright luminous kind of yellow colour, which should show up really nicely. We have got a little bit of yellow in my tartan, but I'm not going to worry too much about that. So the first thing I want to do is loosen off my tension. So I'm going to take that down to a 3, and then I've got my stitch length at 5 at the moment. I'm going to take it down to a 4 just for gathering, because I think that's a nice comfortable way to do. As soon as I start looking at the top of my fabric, and I've got the top where I marked it with a pin at the top, and that's the edge we're going to be working with, then I've just removed the pin for now. And then what we want to do is we want to do one row of stitching quite close to the edge, so possibly where that white row of fabric is then, and then I'm going to do another row of stitching just the other side of the black. So you want one slightly less than your seam allowance and one slightly greater than your seam allowance. I don't reverse on the edge, and if you've got a machine that cuts the threads, remember to leave some ties because you need to be pulling on those. So I've got some lengths of thread at the back, and we're just going to do just a straight stitch across the top. And then when we get to the other side, we're not going to reverse, we're just going to pull our threads out, and we're going to leave a tail. And then we're going to put that same piece of fabric back into the machine, and then we're going to line it up so that we've got a gap between those two rows of stitching. And what you want actually is you want it's a 1 centimetre seam allowance that we're going to be sewing this skirt with. So we want there to be at least 1 centimetre between those two so that we can match those up. So again, I'm just following a line on my tartan and just going across to the other edge. Oh, got a pin on my I think my snips are magnetic. So if I hold this up to the camera, hopefully you can see I've got a nice yellowy row of stitches there and another row of yellowy stitches just there on the edge, and there's a gap between them. So now I want you to go ahead and do those same rows of stitching with the same settings of your machine on the top edge, so the edge that you've marked with your pin, on all of your two front pieces and on the top of your back skirt piece as well. And then once you've done that, let's meet back here. Now, just before you do anything else, remember to tighten up your tension. So take your tension back to where it was. Mine was about 5. And if you've got your stitch length still marked on, then remember to take your stitch length back down again. But it's your tension one that's the important one. So let's just put the back of the skirt to one side for the moment. We don't need to do anything with that one. And then what we're going to do is take both of our fronts, and let's have the top side up first. And then we're going to separate out our 2 threads from our top thread from our bobbin thread, and then holding on to the bobbin thread and top thread, sorry, we're going to then just pull on the fabric by holding our finger and thumb, and that will pull the fabric along those threads. So let's do it from I always gather from one side into the middle, and then the other side into the middle, and that goes quite nicely. And we'll make sure that we get that nice and even, and that gathers are sitting all nicely on top of each other.